Welcome to Conversations with the Candidates. I'm Tammy Daniels, editor of iBerkshires.com. This candidate conversation is a little bit unusual because it's with a Berkshire County candidate who is running for an office that we don't normally talk about in Berkshire County. Tara Jacobs, a member of the North Adams School Committee, is running for Governor's Council for the 8th District. This is the first time we've had a Berkshire County candidate in memory, and I think Tara may be able to tell us more about that. But she's going to talk to us about what the Governor's Council is, why she's running, and why you should vote on September 6th in the Democratic primary. So I'd like to welcome Tara to the conversation. And Tara, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to start out?
Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk with you and to share what the Governor's Council is all about and why I'm running. So I'm Tara Jacobs, and I live in North Adams, and I am the only Berkshire resident in the race in the Democratic primary for Governor's Council. And in fact, we looked back as far as the online records go and have talked to some historians too to try to find any representation to the Governor's Council from Berkshire County, and it doesn't appear that we've ever had a seat at that table, which I think is it's indicative of the lack of representation that we have in Boston, and it is reflected too in the judicial bench, and not having representation on the Supreme Judicial Court, not having it filters throughout where we really are a voice that needs help being amplified in Boston, and this is one way in. So I live in North Adams. I am on the school committee. I'm on the North Adams School Building Committee. I am the chair of the trustees at the North Adams Public Library, and I'm also the city chair of the North Adams Democratic City Committee. And before that, have been involved in other boards, commissions, steering committees, doing good work to help affect positive change for our communities and our county. 6 years on the Berkshire Commission on the Status of Women, where we helped to launch the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program that has helped to bring down our teen pregnancy rates in the county for the first time in generations, and served on our local cultural council as well as the school subcommittee chair, helping to place 50% of the local cultural council grant funds into our school systems to help with all kinds of things from arts and performing and STEM-based opportunities.
So we know the basic things that the Governor's Council, we know, recommends judges, but it also does a lot more. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. It's been an interesting campaign because most people have not heard of the Governor's Council, let alone what it does. And so this has been a campaign of building awareness and educating people about the Governor's Council. So it's great to start there. Yeah. So the Governor's Council is made up of 8 members who represent districts. I am running for District 8. Each district is kind of carved out by having 5 Senate districts within each district. So we in District 8 are the largest geographically, but the smallest from a population standpoint. And this district will represent 102 cities and towns in all 4 Western Mass counties and a little bit of Worcester County as well. And what they do, they work with the governor. The lieutenant governor is their ex officio chair. And they are located in the governor's suite at the State House. Their door is next door to the governor's chamber door. And their role, they have many things that they do, but they are an advice and consent board to the governor, a check and balance on the executive branch, largely focused on judicial work. So they confirm every judge across the state, from the district level up to the Supreme Judicial Court. They come through the Governor's Council for confirmation. Their decisions are final and can't be overruled by the governor, and they can overrule the governor if they reject his or her nominee. In addition to judicial confirmations, they also are responsible for the placements of every clerk magistrate in the state, selecting our parole board, If there are cases that come before the Governor's Council for pardons or commutations, their decision there too is final. And there's a bunch of other judiciary-related administrative work that they do in appointing people. I've really been focused on the judges and the parole board in this campaign, but everything they do is important and impacts our communities and our state. And so that's a big part of why I'm running, is the work itself and how I see it being an opportunity to affect positive change for our communities through the confirmation process and choosing the best candidates who, of course, not only are qualified, but have the character and the community understanding to really best serve us at the local and the state level. And on the parole board, really hoping to be a voice to help promote nominating and then confirming members to that board who are more diverse than what it is now. I'd really love to see diversity, not just from a racial standpoint, but from a perspective standpoint, experientially. See more mental health voices at that table, and ideally even someone who has had experience with incarceration and has turned their life around to now be doing good in the world, who has the qualifications and the perspective to lend that to the parole board as well. So the second reason I'm running and am interested in this, I think the work is so important and I want to do that work, but because of the access, this group meets every Wednesday in the State House and works directly with the governor, directly with the lieutenant governor, and is surrounded by the legislators on a weekly basis. The opportunity to be a voice for Western Massachusetts and our needs and amplify what is an underrepresented block for Western Mass in the State House. We need our voices amplified, and to do it as a Governor's Council member is different than as a legislator who's involved in the actual legislative process. But to be able to bring the needs, the concerns, and to be able to share the nature of our problems to help get solutions that actually do affect change and work for us when they come from Boston.
So the Governor's Council has a lot of power that for a very small group of people, right? How many on the council?
So there's eight
There's just
altogether.
8 people on the council.
Yeah.
So have you, when you've been going around during your campaign explaining your reasoning for why you want to be on, are people surprised when they learn exactly what the Governor's Council does?
First off, for something that is so important to be so little known, people are surprised because they don't stop to think, well, how do our judges get their seats? How do these different elements that this council is responsible for, who's responsible, who's the power? It's very murky. Transparency has been a component of why I'm running, because I think the lack of transparency and the murkiness around how they operate has led to this lack of understanding that they even exist. So I should probably say more about who I am, but in this campaign, I am the only person, not just from Berkshire County, but I'm the only non-attorney in the race, and I'm also the only woman who's running for this seat in the Democratic primary. And as that, my entire focus has been on bringing the voice of the people into the process of who are our judges. Judges don't just work with lawyers. They work with community members and victims and advocates and families and their community. And I want to be that voice that helps to ensure that we are infusing that perspective into the work of confirmations. But also, I want to be a two-way communication back to our communities, because I think there's so many reasons I think that this is such a little understood role. And one of them is the lack of presence and transparency of our government. When's the last time you sat down with a Governor's Council representative to District 8 and talked about the decisions they're making, what's on their agenda, what's their goal in terms of serving us? Right. So my plan, if I can win this role, is to regularly interact with communities in the same way I've been doing while I've been campaigning, have office hours across the district in each of the counties each month, and not just actively listen the way I have been doing through this campaign, but as a member of Governor's Council to share, what's on the agenda, what are the decisions we're making, who are the especially if it's a local candidate, who are the nominees that we're considering, and what do you want to engage in that process as community members into the work the Governor's Council does, to hear the voices outside. The legal community has a lot of voice. Yeah. There's a lot of representation, and a lot of nominees come through the legal community's advocacy for various roles. There's a lot of political influence involved in that. So to not just listen, of course I will also listen to lawyers and former judges and hear their perspective, but to extend that to our communities whose lives are impacted and who have experience to share in terms of their needs, but also potentially specifically about a candidate that they are familiar with and have had experience with, to listen to them.
Right. And to make it clear, you don't need to be an attorney to be on the government. And there have been people on Governor's Council who are not. In fact, I believe there's at least one or two people right now who are not attorneys who are on it. So
it's an elected position. There's
right.
no requirement to have a legal background. There's 2 current non-attorneys who serve. One's been there for over 20 years, and one's been there for, I want to say, 14 years. And like I said, there's 6 attorneys on the Governor's Council right now, and specifically around judicial nominations, there are 2 groups of attorneys. One is called the Judicial Nominating Committee, and they are all attorneys, 100% attorneys who are appointed by the governor to serve in that role, and they do the initial vetting in the nominating process, and then they move it along to another group of 100% attorneys, the Joint Bar Committee, which is appointed by their bar associations. So there's 45 attorneys involved in the first 2 steps. And just also to say, to become a judge, it's an 18-month to 2-year process so it's about 18 months before you even get to the Governor's Council for that final confirmation. They are the final decision-making body, but there's a vetting process and a pipeline beforehand. And so lawyers are very well represented in the process, but 99% of us are not attorneys, and we deserve representation too. So that's a big part of why I'm running, and why I think I'm best qualified to diversify the perspective at the Governor's Council itself, so that the decisions they make are more diverse for our bench, to find more people who are of color and who are of a community and have experience beyond the traditional status quo of what they've been confirming, but also on the parole board, look for diversity there as well.
And I know there have been questions about transparency on the Governor's Court. This sort of came to the fore earlier this year when they tried to vote down. Because of COVID-19, everything went online. A lot of stuff went online. And then there has sort of been this clawback trying to push back and be, I don't want to say secretive, but perhaps less transparent than they had been during the COVID time. And I know a number, I'm not sure if I think all of the Democrats running right now are like, we need to keep streaming it. We need to provide people so they can actually see what's going on. So, and maybe understand better what this very unique, tiny group does, in the bowels of the State House. Yeah. Everything tends to go to Boston. We don't hear anything about it, and we just sort of get the results. We don't really see the process of what's happening. So,
and you might not even see the results if it's not local.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So partially it was COVID driven, but the State House closed for a very long time because of COVID, and they continued to do their work. And so cameras were brought into the room, remote access became available for them to do their work of deliberating and confirming. And then when it became safe again, they removed those cameras and went back to how they had been before. And there was an outcry. People were, those who were even aware, but who had finally had that ability to be able to see what they were doing, push back. And after a little more than a month, under duress, they brought the cameras back. It's an interesting group because they are not subject to open meeting law. And so they can decide things like that. But thankfully, there was that pressure brought to them that, once the cameras went in, to remove it was really just a step away from transparency. And we definitely need more transparency, and those cameras are a big part of it. But also accessibility. So we're coming from the farthest end of the state, and in Western Mass, to be able to participate and to share your voice required, prior to the cameras, you to go to Boston. You need to have the accessibility in terms of transportation and time. It's almost a privilege to be able to take the time and be able to get yourself to Boston and not know when you're going to go before them. So basically carve out an entire day and just wait until you get a chance.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things I've been saying I would love to see happen is to move the hearings locally, especially for Western Mass, maybe Cape Cod, like parts of the state where it is a burden and a barrier to participating because of distance. Because even remotely participating in the process, you have to be aware it's happening, you know?
Right.
But if you were to transport the process to where the people are, you have more opportunity to really engage the community in participating, sharing their views, but also learning about what's happening and how it works. And again, the more we can do to bring awareness to who this group is, what they do, and how it impacts people's lives. I mean, judges matter. I think it's become clear to us recently just how much judges matter and how much they can impact our lives. And so I think it's to the good to help to spread the word and to, you know, increase transparency and accessibility and participation so that there's more accountability in what the Governor's Council does as well.
So based on why do you think you would be a good member of the Governor's Council? Sort of like, why this office that nobody ever hears about?
Yeah.
Until something bad happens, I have to say.
Well, for a few reasons, and thank you for the question.
Yeah.
One reason is my education, my experience. I largely see this as a role that is similar to the recruiting and hiring work that I've done throughout my career and currently. I have a career where I was management level and regularly interviewing and hiring candidates and evaluating qualifications and making selections based on best fit and abilities, and that has translated into my more recent experiences on school committee, hiring our superintendent of schools, being involved in search committees for our business administrative roles and other administrative roles, and even most recently at the library as a chair of the trustees, working to find a qualified candidate to serve as our library director. And we've just recently hired a fantastic new library director. And that was an entire process in evaluating not just qualifications, but character and sensibilities around serving our community and who would be a best fit in terms of doing the role from a management standpoint and the technical aspects of library work, but also from a character standpoint of who would best integrate into and collaborate with our staff and our community and serve us best. And so that ability to assess qualifications, but also the character, is something that I think is completely relevant and on point to what this work is. Also, in my education and career and current existence, I studied social psychology research undergrad and infused that into my MBA work as well, sort of a psychological bent to the work that I did there. And management was focused on change management and operational behavior and things like that. And then my career in advertising was brand strategy and consumer insight, which is all about actively listening to people and understanding their hearts and minds and their beliefs and their needs and their fears and their values. And I've brought those skills to bear in the work that I've been doing since, where I've really focused my entire life on doing work to affect positive change in my communities. It's been a driving, motivating force for me, and I've been doing that at the local and county level for a really long time. And for me, this is the natural progression of an opportunity on the Governor's Council to affect positive change, but now at a state level that will benefit us on a local community level, but extends that work. And it feels like linearly the next move into taking the reason I've been doing all the work I've been doing, wanting to, in the case of Governor's Council specifically, wanting to work towards equity solutions and promote social justice and racial justice and gender, environmental, and economic justice through the selections and confirmations that the Governor's Council does. And I really see this being as a cog in a machine where this particular cog that is Governor's Council is an opportunity where in a very focused way, start to do the work of dismantling systemic injustice in our state. One of the things that I've been talking about and focused on is that, you know, we're a very progressive state in a lot of ways, and yet in the nation, we're one of the worst on our rate of the incarcerated population's racial disparities compared to the general population. There is systemic injustice built into our system, and it needs to be dismantled, and that only happens through change of focus, and literally focusing those values and that desire to affect that kind of change into every decision that is made into the deliberation process for every candidate. The Governor's Council gets to have, prior to hearings, a personal one-on-one with every candidate. So you have an opportunity to really dive deep and understand who these people are, and the questions that a Governor's Council member would ask come from their values and their focus. And my focus would be around this social justice desire to ensure that our candidates are very qualified, but also understand the nature of the systemic injustice that we have, understand their own biases, and are working to affect change in how they make their decisions. We have so many instances of two similar charges ending up very differently based on whether the person was a person of color or not.
Is there a recent action that the council took that you did not agree with?
Yes.
Okay.
I've spoken out. I've spoken out a number of times, and there's a statement on my website about it. But about a little more than a month ago, there was a candidate who was before them, a nominee for the Superior Court level, with a history of supporting pro-life candidates and organizations. She was very evasive in answering questions about it, but it was clear from her background and the few things she did say that this was an anti-choice nominee. And 3 of the members of the Governor's Council voted against it. One stood up and made a strong statement about it and how this failed my litmus test, and this is, you know, regardless, this is bad, but given what's going on in our nation right now and the undermining of Roe, the removal of our rights reproductively, this was a terrible decision. 5 decided to confirm, and one was our District 8 Representative Mary Hurley. She voted to confirm this nominee, and the commentary was like, well, she's a very nice person. One member, who not our District 8, but another district's representative, said this isn't a judicial issue, it's a legislative issue, which I disagree with completely. I'm sure it will be challenged in our courts sooner than later. But I also think it's important to understand where people are coming from who are before them for judicial nominations based on a person who is anti-choice and pro-life is going to also have other judgments and values that affect people, even if the case is not directly an abortion-related case. What other judgments are they going to be making? How are they going to be judging more harshly people whose life choices they don't agree with? So I think it's a litmus test for a reason, because it bubbles over into other areas. So I was outraged when they made that decision. I couldn't believe ever they would make that decision, but especially right now. Knowingly to put somebody in, and judges move up the ladder too. So you may be confirming someone for a specific court that you don't believe will ever be relevant, which I again disagree with. But that person, once they become a judge, our Supreme Judicial Court comes from the lower level courts. They get promoted up. And same with our Supreme Court. They come from states where they've had a role. And I think it's dangerous to have made that choice, and it flies in the face of what the majority of our community members across the state want and believe. And so that one was one that was very recent, and while I may have been, disagreeing with other things, this one just rose to another level of just complete outrage.
Well, and I think this brings into the things that legislators always have to weigh is your beliefs, what you believe that the state should be doing, and how you represent your people. So how do you, you're a very progressive candidate. How do you speak to perhaps constituents who are not as progressive? And how do you explain your reasoning to them? I think once elected, you represent your entire district, the people who voted for you and the people who didn't vote for you. And going back to what I said, excuse me, earlier, connecting with communities and community members across the spectrum of experience, but also in each of these individual communities, to really understand and bring in their voices to the process and reflect that back in making the best choices to serve our communities. The better I understand each community, the better when a position is local, because you vote on all the positions regardless of whether it's in your district or not. There are certain litmus tests for me, and the being pro-choice. I have no issue with someone having a personal decision around choice that is different, that they would never for themselves. I think that is valid. I think that is fair. It is their right. It is their privilege. It becomes an issue when that personal sensibility they project outwards to control others' freedoms and rights. If elected, I will do my best to connect with, to listen to, and to represent all of Western Massachusetts, not just those who supported me, not just those who voted for me, but the full holisticness of Western Mass will be, mine to represent and connect with in the best of my ability. Yeah. It's really difficult sometimes with this because the Governor's Council has sort of not been part of Berkshire County. I've been covering elections for more than 20 years here at various newspapers, and this is the first time the Governor's Council has really come up. We've always put in the results, so-and-so, I don't know who that person is. Did that person ever come here? I don't think so. I don't ever remember even interviewing somebody for Governor's Council. So it's kind of unusual, which is one of the reasons why we're having this candidate conversation. So what have you, but now you've been out, there's 102 communities in the 8th district, and you've been actively campaigning, I know, up and down the county and outside the county. And so what are you hearing when you're out campaigning for this? Are people surprised to see you? Are they?
Yeah. So 102 cities and towns across literally half the state. Yeah. I have put over 12,000 miles on my vehicle.
That's
at
a year's
this
worth.
point. in only, and literally to the extent that, the check engine light's on and we have to figure out what's going on because the poor thing is like, what are you doing? But I've gone everywhere. I've gone to communities that have fewer than 1,000 residents. I've gone to Springfield numerous times, and I've been all the places in between. And I've been connecting across the board with our elected officials who are in these communities, select people, city council members, mayors, state reps, state senators, and people where they are. So I've talked to people in housing authorities. I've talked to people at recovery centers. I've talked to people literally in parks waiting for a bus, and everything in between. I've really done my best to really live a few things. I want to be the voice of the people. That means talking to the people where they are and finding a diversity of experience in who I've been talking to about this. But also, what I've been hearing is two things. One, Western Mass as a whole shares a whole lot. We have so many big issues in common: transportation, access to healthcare and mental health care, economics like jobs, and in some of the more remote places, broadband is still an issue that is still on there. So there are a bunch, and there's even more than that are just shared experience of being in Western Mass. That when I talk about being from Berkshire County, I think it's a benefit because who understands more than any other part of this district how little Boston gets what our challenges are, but also because I recognize, we're the smallest population in this district, and so, even more so have to do the work to filter out there and to meet people and to hear what their issues are. And having done that, there are communities that have very specific and I think relevant to Governor's Council challenges. Like when I was in Lee, the focus is on, a PCB dump that they are fighting, that they are taking to litigation, and it will show up in the courts. In some communities, it's been about racial issues in their police departments where they have challenges and they're fighting discrimination cases. It's been different for each community, but each community does have their own, in Greenfield, they have that issue with their police department, but also there's a group that's really fighting to affect change around something called home equity theft, where if you go into your tax bill is beyond what you can afford, the state or the city will take your property, sell it, but not give you the equity that you had built. So whatever above and beyond what that tax bill was belongs to them all of a sudden, whereas if you go into foreclosure, the bank takes what's owed but gives you your equity. So that's called home equity theft, and that's an issue
that's a new one. I gotta admit, I've never heard of that one. Holy cow.
So that is something that legislatively
Yeah.
needs protection because it's happening across, especially post-COVID and the economic, but it was happening before, but it's happening in greater numbers now. So this is the kind of conversations that I'm having, and they're very specific to the needs, the pain points in these different communities. And going back to what I said earlier, some of these are legislative issues that, from an advocacy standpoint, I could be a voice in Boston to help amplify our Western Mass needs and concerns. Some of them are, like the Lee situation, it's relevant in terms of when a nominee comes up that would be for, land court or another court where, these would be the kinds of conversations I'd be having in that personal interview and in the hearing to suss out, what are their sensibilities and their qualifications and their values that will impact our communities as they fight these battles across our district. Yeah.
That's interesting.
I gave you a new one, huh?
Yeah, I gave you a new one.
I've been learning a lot. I've been hearing
I guess. Yeah. So we also want to bring up that you said you have been doing a deep dive into, not you necessarily, but your campaign has been doing a deep dive into voting for Governor's Council. And I had looked up some of the last ones, and they seem to be in Pittsfield, and like 75% of the votes cast, like 25% of the votes were just blanks.
Yep.
It wasn't super off from Pittsfield. It looks like everybody just sort of clicked the box going down from looking at who they were voting for. But I know you've said, I know they've been less than that in North Adams. They've been very low because I think people see one name.
Hopefully not this year.
Hopefully not this year. People see, sometimes if there's nobody running against them, there's one name, people just say, okay, I guess that person's been in there, I guess I'll just vote for them.
Yeah.
So what has your campaign found for sort of voting for Governor's Council in the 8th District?
Yeah, so the numbers across the district have been fascinating, and consistently, and I'm sure this is across the state as well, because so few people understand or are aware of what Governor's Council is, many people skip voting in it because they don't know enough. They feel like they don't know the candidates, they don't know what it is. Also, it doesn't say Governor's Council on the ballot, it says counselor. So the blank has been a competitor of mine since the beginning of this campaign. It's why I've been doing everything I can do to spread the word and build awareness around what it is that Governor's Council is and what they do, why it's so important, and please don't skip it. I've been calling it beat the blank. Right?
Beat the blank.
So I'm trying to beat the blank, because literally when we looked at the numbers, there's some communities where blank came in number 1, and then whoever came in after the blank was the winner. And other places it was number 2 or number 3, but it's always a sizable chunk of voters leave it blank. And so from the outset, I thought it just had to do with this lack of familiarity and awareness. But when I learned that on the ballot it says counselor, I literally talked to our Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, about it and said, what can we do about this? Because it's not helping. Like, right. So many people said to me, I've never heard of it. I've never seen it on a ballot. It turns out you're right, because it said counselor. So, there's so many factors around why I think it's such an obscure race and why so many leave it blank. But I've been doing everything I can to create a viral spread of what this is, why it's important. I met someone who's never come, so many, and to go to your other part of your question, because I've been talking to people across this wide spectrum of experience and lives, that no candidate period has come to talk to them, but especially this thing they've never heard of called Governor's Council, and I leave everyone with the message, like, please tell your friends, like, spread the word, and just trying to do a really strong word of mouth, because people listen and remember when someone says, like, oh my gosh, this woman came into the housing authority, or this woman came into our recovery center, or on the street I met this person who's running for something that actually decides who our judges are, decides who our parole board is, and that matters. And I've been hearing back too, when I meet people who have heard of Governor's Council, because it's not no one. There are some people there who know what it is. The majority of those who know what it is are lawyers or former judges who've been involved in the process, who are aware it exists, who know what their path is to becoming a judge. But the other population who is familiar are people who have often heartbreaking stories about either their personal experience or their family members' experience with the judicial system, with incarceration, with the parole board. And because the stories, and uniformly these stories have great dissatisfaction and trauma around the experience, leads a person to say, who's in charge of this? Who decided that person should be a judge? Or why this parole board isn't giving most of the cases even a look, let alone an opportunity for parole? Who put those people? And they will have done the research to figure out and then care about the Governor's Council. But it's a very small group. And if you think about it, almost everyone at some point is going to come before a judge, be it a family court with an adoption, or a probate court, or a dispute with a landlord, or it goes on and on and on. Like, it's not only in the criminal capacity that people encounter court system and judges. And like I said before, judges matter. Is this person someone who's going to be just and fair and have compassion and an understanding for the community that they're serving and the challenges they have? Are they going to be aware of their own biases and be working to ensure that they are as unbiased as possible in judging the person before them and giving equitable, similar sentencing to the people they perceive as having a different experience, and understanding the experiences that led people down the path of addiction or mental health aspects? How much are they going to have that compassionate and nuanced understanding of who they're serving? So it is, if known, the kind of thing that should matter a great deal to all of us, but this very, the lack of transparency that we talked about, and also the lack of presence, because like you said, I can't recall ever being in an event where I met my Governor's Council representative.
I just had to look it up. I mean, and I'm a reporter. It would just sort of be at the end of a state story. Oh, and also winner council was this person I never met and never interviewed, and didn't feel like it was difficult.
Yeah.
So if you you said that you've had some forums with your opponents. outside of Berkshire County. I know that. Yeah.
Well,
Does
some
it
were
make it
inside
harder?
Berkshire County
Where?
with Democratic town committees
Okay.
who largely by Zoom.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we were each sitting wherever.
Wherever, yeah.
But we've had a number of candidate forums, almost exclusively through the Democratic committees, hosting them and inviting all of us and asking sometimes very challenging questions where it almost rose to the level of a debate, but they were more, we just got our 2 minutes to answer whatever and not rebut each other. But yeah, we just had our, I think, our second to last one today. We're gonna have another tomorrow. Again, Zoom. So some of them have been in person, but most of it's been remote for this
What's the
campaign.
toughest, you said it before, you've had some tough questions. What's the toughest question do you think you've had?
Well, we get a lot of exactly the same questions over and
Yeah.
over. So they have, maybe the first time we heard it, maybe, but at this point it's become. But no, we've gotten some questions that were really not even Governor's Council related, but you have to stop and really give it some thought because it's a new, there was one, we were in Springfield that had to do with, so Springfield's courthouse is a sick building.
Right.
It's been a big case.
Yeah.
And so Springfield is very focused on that particular issue and how to fix it and how to build a new building and how to ensure a new building isn't also, built with substandard, materials and ends up being a sick building too. Like how do we avoid this a second time? Because it has been such a scandal, a controversy. And so the question had to do with how do you ensure that the building materials. So not really a Governor's Council
Question, yeah.
question because we have no
yeah.
control over something
Over
like that.
buildings, right. That's a whole nother department.
I guess theoretically it could be an advocacy, but it was interesting because I was the last one to answer that question, and I approached it from the standpoint of my school committee work and my library work because buildings, facility maintenance is a big component, and I've been heavily involved on the school district side and as a trustee on the library side in maintaining these buildings and occasionally having we've had issues over the years that have not thankfully risen to the level of this problem in the state courthouse building, which is just a whole other level, thank goodness, from anything we have had to deal with. But I do have experience in managing facilities and in the school building committee in potentially building a new one or renovating or whatever we end up doing, and understand how many state controls are in place around that process and how there's a formula to work through it and there's a lot of protections in place. I mean, in the school side, not only in building the building, but even furnishing the building, there are controls in place to make sure you're using safe materials, non-flammable is like the base level, but even ones that don't off-gas and ones, there's a lot of concern in the state for keeping our public buildings safe. And so I was the only one with that kind of experience to talk about it, but it wasn't really relevant. It was like, I don't think I'll be asked as a Governor's Council member to weigh in on the building of a courthouse, but you never know.
Okay. Is there anything that we didn't bring up that you want to talk about?
We've talked about a lot of good things.
Yeah.
So there's less than a week now.
Right.
The mail-in ballots are out.
This is on a Wednesday morning. We're recording this, so just so everybody knows.
Fair
it's
enough.
a Wednesday morning before the September 6th primary.
Right. And so the mail-in ballots are already out.
Yeah.
There's early voting is already happening. Yeah. It seems like a lot is going to be determined through those two avenues before the actual September 6th primary day. But September 6th is primary day, and just, anyone seeing this who's interested and agrees how important this is, who would like to see someone who is not an attorney but representing the people in the process and fighting for our communities to have a better experience and for our state to do better, to spread please, I would love a vote, but also to share with your friends and family that you learned something important that maybe they hadn't heard about, and to consider not skipping it on the ballot, and ideally to vote for me on September 6th or before.
Okay. All right, and so just so we're clear, Tara Jacobs is one of 4 Democrats who will be on the primary ballot. It will be under Counselor, 8th District. That is the Governor's Council, Counselor, 8th District. And they are Springfield City Councilor Michael Fenton. He has a background in business and tax law. Sean Allen, a private attorney in Agawam, who has represented civil and criminal cases, and he also has a background in social work. Jeffrey Morneau, he's president of the Hampton County Bar Foundation and a former president of the Bar Association. He lives in East Longmeadow, and his specialties are employment law and consumer law. Now, the person who wins the September 6th primary, the Democratic primary, will go on to the general election to face Republican candidate John Comerford of Palmer, a retired investigator and veteran service officer. So make sure you vote on September 6th. Check out these other candidates as well. They all have, well, Mr. Comerford I don't believe does, but the Democratic candidates all have web pages that you can look up, and you can find their backgrounds and their candidate statements. They also make candidate statements on Pittsfield Community Television. You can usually find those online, as Jacobs did as well. So please don't forget to vote on September 6th and beat the blank. Vote for somebody for counselor for 8th District. Thank you, Tara. It's been great having you here.
Thank you so much, Tammy.
I know. Well, maybe we'll do more with the Governor's Council now that we have a candidate. We'll pay more attention to it. And good luck to everybody on September 6th. And I also want to thank Northern Berkshire Community Television for partnering with us with this candidate conversation. And thank you again. This is Tammy Daniels signing off.